it's one of those things where, your ticket to play is being able to, making sure that it has a scientific rigor behind it. And then, the next step is, if you want to use tech or, other things to actually bring whatever it is to light, that's kind of the next, part of it, but it needs to prove the final result, in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Pulling all those pieces together, um, it's almost like it's interesting. You're making me think about things, and I'm sort of spacing out a bit because I take for granted, the work that we did on that integration, with my team. We have these calls and we go through it, and it's like we're just, chugging through it, making sure we're getting it right, testing it. But it is a lot of work, to take the science, ensure it's in the platform properly. Then, like you said about the customer experience, like if it's a physician, is an extra step in their process. Okay, maybe your pilot customer likes that, but maybe every other customer doesn't like that. But you better think about that up front. If you have one customer that says, "Yeah, I love this. This is only adding one step to my process. I don't mind." He or she could be an outlier.
Right.
So you have to make sure that you're not just baking your entire story on, say, one step that one customer may or may not want to take. So there's so many nuances to that, and that's expensive to test. And in the way the markets are now, there's the markets, meaning the investment market. Some investment companies don't want to invest in early stage. They may call it early stage, but it's not right. It's where, a few years ago, early stage, they would have, here's an idea. Okay, it sounds good. Let's put some money into it. But now it's much different conversation. So you have to have that, work through. So we work with our physicians really closely up front. I actually enjoy it. I was talking about this last night. It's almost like, the Curious George book when you're a kid. You're kind of like, well, why? Well, why? Well, why? And if you really aren't interested in it, like this is not for you, right? It's like
Right.
I picked up guitar when I was a kid because I wasn't trying to be Eddie Van Halen. I didn't care about rock and roll. It was just interesting to go, well, why does it do that? Oh, why does it do that? And how do I go from here to there? And then after a while, you start to get momentum and you go, oh, well, then why is that like that? If you don't have that sort of thing buzzing in your head every day about what you're doing with your customer, it's going to be a brutal road. So I think that's so important. And I know you do a lot of work in this space in life sciences and go to market and marketing. So it's a big component for me to get my hands dirty. But I love that. To me, that's what gets me out of bed. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big part of this. Clayton Christensen's book, "The Innovator's Dilemma," just keeps like ringing in my head as well. There was an executive at GE that I remember. In one of my roles, he just said, "Look, you need to read this book, but you really need to understand what this book is saying in terms of like that customer feedback loop. Yes, it's important, but also making sure that you have the scale behind it, and that the real results, in what you're asking, will pay, fruit as well. That you're not just like randomly asking a bunch of questions, without a purpose or direction behind it either.
Yeah. This is interesting. I love talking about this. I mean, you and I could talk about this over coffee or a drink anytime because it's so interesting. So I went to Northwestern, I went to Kellogg, and the reason I went to Kellogg was there was a professor there. I'm not joking. I was looking at a bunch. His name is Robert Walcott. And he had a book, and I could turn around and grab it for you. And I forgot the name of the book actually, but it's a strategy book about customer, communication and how you, really build an innovation, how you build an innovation business and a product. So Robert Walcott, check him out. Really interesting guy. Super, super inspirational. It was like light went on for me. But I come back to what you see in the press about little things with Steve Jobs, they drop, and you go, it's interesting how, he thought about things. And it's interesting to study it because there's so many nuances to, like, to what you just said. And there's some basic principles that you have to execute on, and it's not always obvious. I talk to VCs all the time, and And I love getting no's more than any. I said this yesterday too. I love getting no's because every time someone says no to something, or they don't believe in, or they say, "Oh, I don't like that. I don't understand that. It doesn't make sense." Or, "Why are you doing that? Do this." I love it because it gives me like this little like thing. I write it down and I'm like, okay, let me go research this person's point of view on whatever it is. A lot of times it's, the business model, to be honest, but that's part of the innovative process and customer process. And I really work at it. I really work at it because I'm like, okay, this guy was pretty direct about believing that this is the better way,
Mm.
and it might not be, but it might be, and I'm like, just the fact that it might be is like, well, okay, I'm gonna, I'm gonna work on that. He could be right. And I had a guy last week, he said something about a market. And I said, all right, I'm listening. I'm going to take that. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to work through it. And you take little sound bites from everybody in the innovative process, in the customer journey. And people will say things that don't make sense, and they're just trying to, fill their calendar with meetings with startups to say they met with 5 this week and they disqualified 5 or something. I don't know. But it was really intriguing to me. Once I got over the hump of getting punched in the nose in the investor side, I took every punch in the nose like a gift. And I
Mhm.
really, really mean that. I like love it now. I'm like, I can't wait for somebody to tell me what's not right, because it just gives me some food for thought to pivot on, like it's always valuable. So the customer journey couldn't be more important, um, even to the investment community right now as we speak. It's just really important.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's funny because I get asked a lot of times from people who are trying to start, start their organizations, and I sort of, I'm like, have you had your first customer conversation? Because in my mind, you don't necessarily need marketing, you don't need a website, you don't need logo, you don't need really anything to go have that first customer conversation. And so the people that tell me that they want all of these things kind of in place before they actually get started, I'm like, look, in my mind, these are delay tactics. So, like, get out there and start having conversations, because the minute that you start getting some of the yeses, some of the maybes, and a lot of the nos, then you'll really know like how validated you are.
Yeah.
And then like, can you get to that first paying customer? Can you put in place the minimum things that you need to get the first paying customer? And then can you grow that to 10 paying customers? And then, yeah, I mean, there's all these people that are like setting, they're trying to go from 0 to million. I'm like, just go make like whatever your first money is. Like, go make that
Yeah.
first money, because that will validate kind of the initial thought. And then the question is like, are there more people like that, or are you validating this against an audience of one?
Right. I just read that somewhere. It was it like one is a, oh, I'm gonna hack this up. Like one is a, luck, two is a, a possibility, and three is a trend or something, four is real, whatever, that goes. But it is interesting too. Like our first customer that paid, um, it was like, okay, will this stick, And that was what kept me up at night. It's like, well, this could just be like this guy like wanted to try something with genetics that's interesting, maybe. And then we really got into a deeper cadence with the hospital systems and some of the pharmaceutical companies that we can really drive some significant impacts. But it still is, as a startup, it's still a daily practice to constantly just ask. And you don't, it's almost like you want to believe your own BS, right? You want to, and you really do, because you're like, all right, I can sleep better tonight because I got this idea and I think it's right. And then what's worse is the feeling when you're wrong, right? Well,
Yeah.
so you could say I want to be right, and that feeling is about, on a scale of 1 to 10, that right feeling is about a 6. But then when you get you're wrong or the no, and it feels like an 8, you're like, oh, I'm net -2. Like
Yeah.
I would rather just keep asking and getting my 6 up to a 10, as opposed to that feeling of, I'm wrong and being an 8. So it's like a self-torture, but yeah, you've got to have so many inputs, and there's a lot, and every system is different. So when you're selling it to pharma, there's different challenges.
Sure.